Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nick Harper and here are the headlines. Thousands of migrants head to the US-Mexico border with hopes of reaching the US as Biden hosts a key Americas summit. Kremlin demands lifting of Western sanctions against Moscow before Russian grain can be delivered to international markets. Moscow says sanctions affecting shipping insurance, payments and access to European ports. Microsoft to substantially downsize its Russia business in response to Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. In March, Microsoft suspended new sales of its products and services in Russia. Iran disconnects 2 UN nuclear watchdogs monitoring cameras at nuclear sites. Claims the disconnected cameras had been operating beyond the safeguard agreement between Tehran and the IAEA. And a car drives into a crowd at a busy shopping district in central Berlin, killing one person and injuring a dozen others. US President Joe Biden is hosting the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. It's among the most important forums for regional engagement. The current administration has framed the summit as an opportunity to reaffirm its commitment to Latin America, especially on critical topics like migration. But criticism is being levelled at the summit for a seemingly thin agenda. Meanwhile, thousands of migrants are on the move in Mexico. A caravan of between 4,000 to 5,000 migrants is headed towards the United States. Most of them hail from Venezuela, Central America and the Caribbean. Most migrants arrive in the United States from Guatemala and Honduras. Leaders from those two nations have decided to skip the summit. This comes as detentions of migrants at the US-Mexico border have hit record levels this year. US Vice President Kamala Harris has touted a $3.2 billion investment plan. The corporate pledges will address some of the economic factors driving migration from Central America. This billion-dollar investment will have a direct impact on sectors like agriculture, textiles and banking services.
In context, when we put that $3.2 billion in context, consider that El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras have a total population size of about 30 million people. A $3.2 billion investment will then have a direct impact on the quality of life for people throughout that region.
The summit saw a rocky start, though, after it faced jeers from Latin American leaders. The reason was a pared-back invitation list. Washington has excluded 3 countries: Cuba, Nicaragua and Venezuela. For the exclusion, the White House cited reservations regarding the lack of democratic space and the human rights situations. In response, Mexican President López Obrador has decided to boycott the summit, while in Havana, the Cuban government issued a statement calling its exclusion anti-democratic and arbitrary.
Pues ya está ahí nuestra posición. Nosotros defendemos que no debe haber expulsión de ningún país, que ningún país tiene derecho a decirle a otro cómo gobernarse. Y que la base para una nueva etapa en América, en las Américas, es el respeto mutuo. Es lo que nosotros sostenemos y vamos a defender.
Following in Mexico's footsteps, key nations in Central America are dispatching only lower-level delegates instead of heads of state. Critics say this is a sign that the US is failing to garner support in its own backyard. And the absence of several countries from the US-hosted summit has only underscored America's struggle to exert its influence in the region. The Summit of the Americas is a series of meetings of leaders of the Western Hemisphere. The first summit was convened by US President Bill Clinton back in 1994 in Miami. The aim was to develop a new relationship with the Hemisphere in the post-Cold War environment. Well, for more on this, let's go across to our correspondent Susan Turani, who's joining us live in New York City. Well, first up, Susan, let's talk about the thousands of migrants that are currently heading towards the United States. What more do we know about this migrant caravan?
Right, a caravan that's heading in the United States, really a 10,000 strong caravan, mostly women and children, and we're told that the majority of this caravan is coming from the country of Venezuela, as this Summit of America is underway, led by the United States in Los Angeles, California. Despite the fact that the Biden administration had tried to sort of backtrack and not talk about this migrant crisis along the southern border, we really see this caravan front and center, and it's really no coincidence that it's happening as, you know, this Summit of America is happening not only really so close to the southern border, but as the so-called border czar, Kamala Harris, is also in California and has even failed to visit the southern border. And then, you know, you also have that Title 42 that's, you know, at the heart of this border crisis. And, you know, a lot of these individuals that are on this caravan are hoping that once they get to the border, that Title 42 would expire. That's a Trump-era law that would prevent them from coming during times of emergency that was set in place during COVID. The Biden administration had wanted to lift that. Courts prevented it, and now, you know, they're sort of hoping that the president would stick to his promise and they would have an opportunity to cross the border. But definitely an immigration crisis for the president. Indeed, I do want to mention that the Homeland Security did issue a warning just yesterday, saying that there is security threats, external and internal, and one of those security threats is regarding the southern border in the coming months.
And Susan, as we heard, quite a few of the countries have snubbed the summit. Is there a chance that this could become an embarrassing flop for President Biden?
Well, yeah, well, it already is. I mean, the White House didn't expect this to happen on the one hand. On the other hand, it's put itself in a situation where Mexico can dictate whether or not, you know, countries like Cuba and Venezuela can either come to the summit or not, when it should be the other way around. They shouldn't even, you know, it should have been a non-starter. But when the United States put itself in a situation where it gave this opening that it was willing to negotiate for oil with countries like Cuba and Venezuela, and at a time when there is talk that the Biden administration might be going and visiting Saudi Arabia, when at one point called it a pariah state, then, you know, it sort of seems like it doesn't have its foreign policy agenda and its ducks in order, and it leaves other countries in a situation where it could they have the opportunity to dictate, you know, where they stand and where they could, you know, sort of find an opening to lead or not. This conversation shouldn't have even taken place in the first place, but unfortunately, you know, here we are, and it creates this sort of embarrassment for this administration, where key nations that are instrumental in solving this border crisis in the United States, their leaders have decided to skip this summit.
Thank you, Susan. That was Susan Turani joining us live from New York City. After a series of deadly mass shootings across the United States, the US House of Representatives is moving quickly to pass gun legislation. Two separate bills will be discussed. First, the Protecting Our Kids Act, and second, the Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act. Let's understand what these bills have to offer. On Congress's website, the first bill's aim reads, and I quote, to increase age limits on the purchase of certain firearms, prevent gun trafficking, modernise prohibition on untraceable firearms, and encourage the safe storage of guns. Coming to the second bill, which aims to strengthen the red flag laws. The legislation will allow federal courts to remove firearms from gun owners who are believed to be in extreme risk of harming either themselves or others. Now, 19 states across the US already have such laws in place. Under the House bill, though, a judge could issue an order to temporarily remove and store the firearms until a hearing can be held, which can't be longer than 2 weeks later from the initial warning. And the hearing will then decide whether the gun should be returned to the owner or kept for a specific period.
Most gun owners, I think. These are not attempts to take away guns or to punish law-abiding gun owners or to undermine the Second Amendment. Instead, the bills before us are about doing what Congress is supposed to do, listening to the will of the people and taking action to solve problems of the nation. One such problem, gun violence, has robbed the American people of their safety virtually everywhere they go.
Well, the Democrats control the House of Representatives, so it's set to take action quicker, but there's little hope from the Senate, where a united minority of Republicans can block these legislations. Republicans are presenting two arguments. First, rather than strengthening gun laws, they want to focus on improving mental health programs and bolstering school security. And second, that these laws deprive law-abiding Americans of their firearms.
Our nation is in the midst of a widespread mental health crisis. The growing number and frequency of mass shootings are a reminder that our country must take a comprehensive public health approach to gun violence that addresses culture, mental illness, gun safety, and regulations that also respect the Second Amendment. But unfortunately, the measures before us today do not meet that test.
But all of this does allow Democratic lawmakers a chance to reframe the debate for voters ahead of the crucial midterm elections in November. And polls show that these bills will have an appeal to the majority of voters.
That's the guy's name. You know, a criminal's still a criminal. And so how many...
Hollywood actor Matthew Mcconaughey made an emotional speech on mass shootings at the White House. McConaughey, a native of Uvalde, visited the school where 19 children were shot dead. In our next report, we bring you some of the excerpts.
My wife and I, Camilla, we spent most of last week on the ground with the families in Uvalde, Texas. We shared stories, tears, and memories. The common thread, independent of the anger and the confusion and the sadness, it was the same. How can these families continue to honor these deaths by keeping the dreams of these children and teachers alive? Again, how can the loss of these lives matter? So while we honor and acknowledge the victims, we need to recognize that this time, it seems that something is different. Uvalde, Texas is where I was born. It's where my mom taught kindergarten less than a mile from Robb Elementary. Uvalde is where I learned to master a Daisy BB gun. That took 2 years before I graduated to a .410 shotgun. Uvalde is where I was taught to revere the power and the capability of the tool that we call a gun. Uvalde is where I learned responsible gun ownership. We also met Anna and Danilo, the mom and the stepdad of 9-year-old Maite Rodriguez. Maite wore green high-top Converse with a heart she had hand-drawn on the right toe because they represented her love of nature. Camilla's got these shoes. Can you show these shoes, please? Wore these every day. Green Converse with a heart on the right toe. These are the same green Converse on her feet that turned out to be the only clear evidence that could identify her after the shooting. How about that shit? And look, as divided as our country is, this gun responsibility issue is one that we agree on more than we don't. It really is. Responsible parties in this debate seem to at least be committed to sitting down and having a real conversation about a new and improved path forward. A path that can bring us closer together and make us safer as a country. A path that can actually get something done this time.
Next up, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel has defended her policy for Russia. She said that she has nothing to apologise for. During her first major interview since stepping down 6 months ago, Merkel insisted that she had not been naive in her dealings with the Russian president. She said that trying for diplomacy was not wrong just because it didn't work out. Merkel also recalled her support for economic sanctions against Russia over its 2014 annexation of Crimea.
Falsch gewesen. Also ich sehe nicht, dass ich mich da jetzt sagen müsste, das war falsch und werde deshalb auch mich nicht entschuldigen. Und ich weiß auch nicht, was gewonnen worden wäre, wenn Putin einfach 2014 weitergemacht hätte und sich keiner drum gekümmert hätte.
The veteran leader frequently met with Putin during her 16 years in power. She championed a commerce-driven, pragmatic approach towards Moscow, but said that the 24th of February invasion of Ukraine had marked a turning point. Merkel said that there was no justification for the war in Ukraine.
Das ist ein brutaler, das Völkerrecht missachtender Überfall, für den es keine Entschuldigung gibt.
She warned that Putin wants to destroy Europe and that it was very important for the European Union to stick together at times like this. She also insisted that the 2014-2015 Minsk peace agreements were the best bet to end tensions.
Angucken und ich bin im Rückblick, wenn ich über alles summiere, eigentlich froh, dass ich mir nicht vorwerfen muss, ich habe es zu wenig versucht, mit ein solches Ereignis, wie es jetzt stattgefunden hat, zu verhindern. Sondern ich habe es glücklicherweise ausreichend versucht, mit dem jeweiligen französischen Präsidenten zusammen und das
Germany became hugely reliant on Russian energy imports during Merkel's tenure. She irked Western allies by accepting the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which doubled Russian gas deliveries to Germany. The project was shelved by current Chancellor Olaf Scholz after the invasion. A crucial tour is coming up for US President Joe Biden's special envoy. The destination is tiny, but strategically important for Washington. Joseph Jung is a veteran diplomat appointed by Biden. He took up the job just 3 months ago, but is all set to lead the delegation that's heading to the Marshall Islands next week. Talks on a deal governing US economic assistance for the islands is on the cards. Key issues for the Marshall Islands include financial compensation for US nuclear testing and remuneration for the presence of US military bases, as well as climate change mitigation. The Marshall Islands tour would mark the first in-person negotiations since they were largely stalled back in December 2020. The Pacific Islands have emerged as a key front in the Washington-Beijing tug-of-war. Experts are viewing this trip as Biden's attempt to expand America's influence in the region. Just last week, the Chinese foreign minister concluded his visit in the region. Wang Yi went to 8 Pacific Island countries and met with 17 leaders. 52 cooperation pacts were agreed upon, covering 15 domains, but not a security deal, which Beijing was pushing for the most. Pacific leaders made it clear that a security deal is only possible after a regional meeting. In a first, NASA is set to launch rockets from a facility outside the United States. Our next report tells you from where and why.
NASA plans to launch rockets from northern Australia for scientific research within weeks. It's the first time NASA has launched rockets from a commercial facility outside the US. That private spaceport is the Arnhem Space Centre, which is owned and operated by a company called Equatorial Launch Australia. About 75 NASA personnel will be in Australia for the event. During a media briefing in the city of Darwin on Wednesday, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said he hoped the project would inspire young people.
This is a really exciting project. This is about not just the rocket launches itself, but it's about sending a message to younger Australians and indeed Australians of any age who might be looking at retraining for future careers of how important science is. We want the next generation to really look at STEM as part of Australia's future, and that's why this is an important project.
The NASA missions will investigate heliophysics, astrophysics and planetary science phenomena that can only be seen from the Southern Hemisphere. The launches will be the first by the US Space Agency from Australia since 1995.
This fall, 2 new comic books will hit stores in the United States. Tidal Wave Comics will present its Female Force series, and it'll showcase life stories of US Supreme Court Justices Amy Coney Barrett and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Finally, Jurassic World Dominion is already getting off to a great start. The movie, which will hit screens in the United States and India on the 10th of June, had its world premiere in Hollywood. We leave you with some snapshots from the glamorous evening. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. I'll be back again, same time tomorrow. Hope you can join us. Thanks for watching.
What is that?
Biggest carnivore the world has ever seen.
This is right, Arab.